Hello, hello, hello. How's everyone feeling? Did you guys get some lunch? Sick of my voice yet? So I want to welcome, obviously, Joanne, Matt, and the OKRM family on stage right now. They're about to do a very detailed breakdown of the past 3 years of work on the visual identity of ALYX and what makes the brand very special and unique. So give a round of applause to them.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Very nice to be here. Almost 3 years next month to the beginning of this project, so it's a real pleasure for us to introduce and talk about this in detail. We're very excited, and we hope you guys are too.
Yeah, it's been 3 years of all this work, unseen, and it's just going to be amazing to really just show everybody all the effort that's gone in, to the branding of ALYX.
So we just wanted to start off. We're going to take it through. There's kind of like 4 chapters, and we're going to I think at the beginning we're going to take you through in a very sort of orderly way, and I can imagine that we're all going to just enjoy discussing as we go along and sharing some sort of anecdotes also. So just to take it through, this is a very clarified statement which helps explain the context of the project. So we live in extreme times, and many people react to this era with unpredictability, overproduction, injustice, hype, and transience with despair and confusion. But is it precisely these moments of flux that we must rediscover a positive project? And ALYX is certainly one of those. And our times are rich with possibilities, and that's something that we all are very, very aware of. Radical ideas, advanced technologies, alternative forms of living, new relationships with each other, and with material reality. The spirit of affirmative change is central to ALYX, 1017 ALYX 9SM, a brand with a deep desire to influence contemporary culture. And 1017 ALYX 9SM has a new name and logo, but these are only just the finishing touches to a broader process. ALYX is a collective proposition. The ideas expressed here have emerged through debate, dialogue, introspection, and exploration, a team that includes designers, architects, writers, and artists. And we'll explain a little bit about who those people are that we've worked with, and give you a kind of deep insight into what we're describing here. So I think one of the most key aspects of this project, which is what's super unusual in the context of fashion and fashion communication and branding, is just the amount of individual projects within the space of the brand. And this is a kind of diagram that we spent some time drawing. Honestly, you could articulate this in multiple ways. But what we sort of describe this as is a kind of Gestalt, which is an assembly of components and an ecosystem of constantly shifting relationships. So you can kind of, just dipping into this a little bit, you can kind of see that behind everything is the collections, like the fashion itself. And then you have the manifesto, the narrative, collaborations, the specific hardware. You have like the graphic identity, which is not always totally encompassing. It sort of has its own entity. You have spatial and packaging projects, and you have like web and digital elements. And you can see that all of those are kind of crossing over. And I think that's one of the most critical aspects of this work, is that these elements don't exist in isolation. They're constantly evolving and moving and having a relationship with one another. And you could almost imagine this as something which is like over time, it starts shifts and different elements become priorities, and it becomes, in a way, a sort of tangible way to understand the whole. Just to show you guys a little bit of the background of this, I mean, we met Matt in November, like 3 years ago, and it's a difficult thing to like form a collaboration. I mean, we met, it was a beautiful thing, like we felt a lot of common ground, and the process is really very much about getting to know each other, like finding, yeah, exactly, like a kind of common ground and a space in which conversation can occur and ideas can flow. And the way that happens is like a kind of workshop scenario. And workshops are something which, we're already like 10 years in as OKRM, as a design studio. And when we started, workshops weren't really a thing. You know, you would really get a kind of brief from a kind of client or a commissioner, and you would kind of therefore try and like build a conversation. It would take us a lot of time. You know, you'd have to try and like buy yourself kind of ground. But I think what we've found has changed in the industry at large, and also with progressive practitioners like Matt, and is an interest in dialogue, an interest in coming together. So what we did when we first met is we had this kind of discussion, like the building of a manifesto. And what we have here is, as you can see, is like two parts of questioning. One which really involves a questioning into the past and the present, and another which talks about the present and the future. And this is like what, like a 2-day conversation?
Yeah, it was a 2-day conversation, literally about all things that were relevant to living today, to fashion, to the past, understanding where we've been, so we could know where we needed to go forward. And we spent also a lot of time researching branding of other brands that we felt were strong, and trying to understand why they were strong and how certain aspects of them attain longevity. Because that was the goal of ALYX from the beginning, was to create a long-term personal project that could be more than just like, you know, commerce and selling stuff. Like, how can we do something that's more personal and has this unseen value? And we started with a conversation and a group dialogue to really understand what were the most potent points that we needed to achieve with new branding.
Exactly. And I think this sense of the workshop and about building a manifesto, like for those who don't really know what a manifesto is, it's a set of ambitions, ideas, common values. It's a sense what we call a kind of scenario. It's a scenario in which you all work from. And what you're looking at now on the screen is a series of words which are kind of dichotomies, which are words which exist as opposites. And between those opposites, you can find almost like any particular answer. And for instance, in that conversation, the dichotomies were used to stimulate like ideas. And from those ideas, we built a manifesto. And you can kind of see that like here in its totality. It's not like as simple as that, honestly. It's like you're really chewing through like 2 days of conversation, and there's an element of reconversation and exploration, which then is this kind of agreement between ourselves and the group at large, which are things that we know we believe in, and those become the conceptual backbone for like anything to occur.
Yeah. And our friend Jack Self, who you collaborate with, was a part of those original conversations.
But also, I think one of the important things about the manifesto is that it does 2 things. Firstly, it acts as a stimulus for all projects. It's like a benchmark for us to be able to understand what's right, or what's, you know, what fits with the brand. And as a second thing, it's also an ongoing and a growing archive of all of the projects that are created.
So maybe just taking us through like a few of these, just to sort of take a little look, a little deeper. So ALYX sees fashion as a platform for communication, and I think that's really important. We're not dealing with just clothes here, you know, and clothes don't exist in a vacuum. We're dealing with all manners of communication. You could say that as all manners of communication, what are we talking about? We're talking about a cultural and artistic project, and not just a brand. It's really tricky to move away from the term of brand. I mean, brand is like, you know, it's like this kind of word that gets thrown around. Like, it's the word of our time, honestly. And we've talked a lot about this during the last years and all the weeks and months in it, and trying to understand if there's a better word for it, you know. But it's a kind of we see it as a kind of project. And this is important. It's not about it's certainly about evolution. It's not about revolution. And by that, what it means is we're constantly building upon what's come before.
Yeah, and especially that from the clothing side, it's like the similar materials. How can we make silhouettes better? How can, if a customer likes something, they can find what they liked before or a similar version the next season. Our suppliers get more proficient in making the same thing, so the cost can get lower, the quality can get better, and in the end, the value's going back on the customer. So in fashion, a lot of times there's so much waste. It's something new each season, new idea, boom, boom. It's not about having new ideas, but or there's not enough of them, but how can you take the ones that you do and continue to improve them each season and get them better and better and better? And that was a really valuable point.
So ALYX acknowledges the importance of prototypes and archive. And anyone that knows and follows ALYX, I guess you get a sense of that. I mean, in all honesty, I can't wait to share some of that, because there's so much that goes on behind the scenes that you just don't see. The amount and the dedication to prototyping within the collections, but also within the conversations and the conceptual integrity behind everything. And it felt as though when we first started working together, it was like, how do we record all this stuff? You know, there's kind of almost an anxiety. Like, everything's so transient at this point. It's like, how do you like make this work that occurs like part of the project? And we can kind of talk a little bit later about how that came to fruition. And this sense of ALYX recycles and repurposes. Output is not ephemeral. It becomes part of the vocabulary. I mean, that's super connected to what I was describing. But like nothing is ephemeral. Everything's vital. Like any single thing that comes from a process can essentially be the backbone of an entire new piece of clothing, but also can be part of a distinctive piece of communication. And in a sense, it's a building vocabulary. We'll talk a lot about storytelling as we move into the kind of narrative section, the narrative chapter, but storytelling is essential to ALYX.
Yeah, storytelling is what bonds us to a concept or an idea, and it's something that attaches a concept at an emotional level to people. It's something that can make an object become more than just the material that it is made of. So it's very, very important.
And it's also not just about telling stories about clothes as well. It's about telling stories about the philosophy of ALYX. So a lot of the work that we have been doing, which we'll show you in a bit, is not necessarily directly linked to the fashion item that you can buy. So it's creating a context for the fashion to exist also.
So ALYX curates cultural projects as an expression of the time and as an extension of its own ideas. Again, we'll talk about what these cultural projects are, but they're always about the contemporary, and that's our time. And I think one of the things that we'll kind of pick up on as we go through is like, how do we remain aware of the contemporary, and how does ALYX play into that contemporary in a way as a source of also of production and influence. And ALYX is a time capsule of our moment and a record of our beliefs. Do you want to dig a little into that?
Go ahead, because I've been talking a lot. But basically, yeah. I mean, we were talking about earlier yesterday the difference between a belief and attitude. You want to riff off that?
I'm still really interested in that discussion, honestly, because there's like such a crossover. I mean, beliefs are there for the backbone. They're the things that really like stay with us. You know, attitudes shift. But I think with ALYX, there's a strong link between attitude and belief. Like, beliefs become attitudes, attitudes become beliefs. It's like there's a sort of synergy. So this is a big part of the project, and we'll kind of go into this. But showrooms within ALYX are cultural, performative, and engaging public spaces. That's critical. Like, anyone that's ever been to a fashion showroom knows that it's quite rare to find a good one, honestly. They're spaces for selling. And I think the thing that Matt was really helpful and inspiring for us is to say that let's not just make these like beautiful spaces that don't do anything. Let's like really turn these into like engaging spaces where people want to spend time, hang out, people come together. And this is all part of the kind of generosity that keeps reoccurring within the brand. I think this might be one of the last ones. But ALYX is a growing family. This idea of family is something we've really learned a lot about. Again, it links very much to generosity and the love and respect between a group of people. And those are like the employees, but this sort of family of collaborators also. But also can be considered like friends alongside the brand and fans and celebrities. And everyone is considered like part of it. which we think is basically amazing because it's selfless to a certain degree. And ALYX ultimately is a socially minded and ethical business, and that's something that we heard earlier with the sustainability talk, but it goes really deep, actually, into every aspect of the brand. And ALYX believes that with influence comes a social responsibility, and that's a big claim, you know, it's a big manifesto point, and it's one that we constantly reflect on. I think you should talk about that because this is a big point for you.
Yeah, I guess that was just more, you know, came up a lot with just being so in close proximity of people with high influence, and sometimes being let down when they weren't using that for the greater good. And it you know, I think it's something that needs to be used for positive change. And so I think that gives, you know, again, like the brand a reason for existing if we can use, you know, some of that influence to improve our lives and improve the current systems that are in place. So that has to always be a constant reminder of like what and why the choices that we're doing, what's the purpose of them, you know?
And the manifesto is twofold. So on one hand, you have the manifesto that guides us all and acts as a kind of backbone to the work, and like we talked about, it was a kind of scenario for all activity. But on the other hand, the manifesto is a record for all the work that's being produced. And this is a little kind of, I guess you could say, a kind of teaser. But we're currently developing a manifesto book that will be, it's very much in production and will be out and available in the next year, 18 months. But it includes like every single aspect of what's been created. And I think ultimately it outlines and underlines the generosity that the creation of ALYX and ALYX as a brand has. So we're really excited about that.
I think there's also something that you said, Rory, a couple of weeks ago that I thought I should tell people. And it is really about the ideas of the manifesto. You gave that quote from Sol LeWitt, and you said, the idea becomes a machine that makes the art. And that, I think, is fundamental to what you've been doing with ALYX, that it doesn't have this sort of, somebody said this to me once in an interview, they were like, well, people compare me to this because it has this sort of visual onomatopoeia, but the principles behind it are not those principles. It just looks a certain way. And I think sometimes with fashion brands, they look like they have this integrity or they have these big ideas, and there's nothing there. They're just sort of like this kind of faux intellectual sort of nonsense, basically. But I think once you have, I mean, I work quite conceptually as well, and everything has to fit in with this sort of rigorous kind of way of looking at the world. And that's what they're doing very much with ALYX. But I just loved that Sol LeWitt quote because it just says everything. It makes everything stems from the ideas. It's not kind of forced. It's not sort of pretending. They really mean it. So, you know, I think that's kind of an achievement, really.
That's cool.
Okay.
Yeah, agree.
But the thing is that we are all passionate about this conceptual project, and I mean, Sol LeWitt was a conceptual artist and wrote a couple of really good essays. One of which was really he determined and outlined what is conceptual art, and he talked a lot about the idea that once you have faith in the building of the idea, then you allow that to happen. You don't affect the art itself. You let it. It's the outcome. It's the machine that drives the art. And I mean, honestly, we could all sort of talk about that, but it's a beautiful thing that occurs in ALYX, that there's a conceptual project overall, but there's also multiple conceptual projects within it. And those layers are like Joanne said, they're like really there. And yeah, it's very satisfying. and this gives you a little glimpse into like what is this manifesto book. You'll kind of, I mean, honestly, I think we should just like wait till this thing comes out and everyone should get it and like explore it. But like, you know, it's a really crazy amount of material that's being generated, and in a way, I think it's like also for us like super inspiring. Like yesterday we met and we talked about like you know, the project, and we looked back at all of this work and we were like smiling to ourselves, because it's most of the stuff you kind of you create and then you move on. So it's been really important also for us as a kind of tool to use the manifesto process, the archiving process, to learn from what's happening and then knowing what to do next also.
But also, I think one of the great things about the manifesto there, in a sense, is that we're really presenting the clothes in a very kind of stripped back way. It's all about the garments, which contrasts very interestingly to a lot of the other ways that we present the content or represent the content through other visual projects.
Again, this front section's a lot of text. I'm kind of conscious of that, but we wanted to be like generous and showing you guys like what happens behind. But so out of the back of the manifesto, just going back to the kind of the history, let's say, like the thing that was important is to say, okay, we've got this great manifesto. Like now what? Like what do we do? Like what are the objectives? So these are the actual objectives which are extracted from like the first presentation. So number one is like reflect key aspects of the manifesto, obviously. Secondly, like confront the conventions of the traditional systems of fashion presentation, and we sort of touched on that. Those are layered and they need to be explored. We by no means were at any point disrespectful to anything that occurred before, but we saw problems and we felt as though it was an opportunity to kind of investigate like how to fix those problems. But also we wanted to pay a certain amount of homage to the legends, you know, and the ways in which those brands were, the Margielas, the Helmut Langs, the Comme des Garçons, the Yohji Yamamoto. I mean, they're like legendary projects, never mind the clothes. I mean, the way in which those guys cultivated identity and brand is like kind of, they're like total artworks. So that was important. Also, like present a kind of symbiosis of mechanical and luxury. This is really critical to ALYX. I mean, anyone that knows ALYX, that's kind of what it's about, you know. And we really had to like kind of consider what that meant. In a sense, like capturing a spirit of innovation and at the same time like experimentation. This kind of idea of like reflecting ideas and not aesthetics alone. I mean, I think that's the thing. Like aesthetics in a way look after themselves. Like things look good when you have ideas, you know. And honestly, and I think it's a bit of a privilege to work with a brand like ALYX, but you kind of know that everything's going to end up looking good if you have a discipline of the idea. You know, it's not a problem. Develop a common language between graphic identity and clothes. Like this isn't about decoration and like trying to like create a layer over the top of the clothes. This is about like a proper conversation between those two layers. So this is, you'll see this actually in the buckle. I think it's kind of one of the most interesting things, like to remove the kind of logo from the buckle. In a sense, it highlights that, and we'll talk more about that in a moment also. But this sense of educating the customers, I don't know if customers is the right word, honestly, but like educating the people on how things are made. Embed information into the construction of garments. I think the reason why customers is not necessarily the right word is because, yes, people do buy ALYX, but we're also thinking about everyone else that might be interested in it on a cultural level. And I think that's also another aspect of the generosity.
I think that was also something, when we talked before, the idea of things like Margiela and the replica collection where you'd get a jacket and it said this jacket was found here and da-da-da-da-da, and you get this history of things. And that nothing is disposable. The ideas, the feeling behind something, and it's not a con. It's like, if you believe in something, other people should buy it because, you know, they can believe in it too. Whereas I think with sometimes you get this kind of, oh, well, let's pretend. And it's a bit like, no. But I think with that, I mean, and I do think, you know, you're right, we're never working in a vacuum in fashion. We're working there are all these things that have influenced us, it doesn't mean that you're going to rip them off.
Yeah.
But you can pay respect to them. I think that you've done that, really.
Yeah, and I think with the education of people and how things are made, you can understand value and understand why the product's valuable. And I think that's the main thing, is education of value.
So we're going to go into the next section, which is about hardware. So each of these sections has a kind of manifesto point that links back to it, but in this case, ALYX is about evolution and not revolution is critical to this section.
Yeah, so this was like all of when we were just throwing out names and how they looked. This is the drawing board.
I think this is like some of them, right?
Yeah, it's just some of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So as you all know, like ALYX is now called 1017 ALYX 9SM, and it's a tricky thing to like think about what to call something, and in a way it's difficult to go into the details of these points, but it's nice to share all the different versions at least. And I think the thing that, one of the critical aspects of a fashion brand, everyone knows it's the logo, right? Like in the old days, I think that the graphic designer would basically make the logo. That was like the project of the graphic designer. In this case, it's almost like we haven't really discussed the logo since it came to creation because there was too much else to focus on, But the logo we took really seriously. I mean, it was developed as a specific typeface. It kind of came out this idea of what if you make Helvetica, like give Helvetica contrast, so you can kind of see the A's at the bottom. You add a kind of contrast within the sans serif letter form, which is the kind of contrast you might find in a serif typeface. And you can kind of see also at the top, there's two versions of the logo. There's a version for large use and a version for small use. So the small use version has what we call kind of reservoirs, which are like little ink traps which prevent the logo from filling in at small sizes. And the logo
which is a cool nod to the past because that was developed in the printing presses. So when you printed a small typeface, it wouldn't just be a black dot.
Exactly.
So that was kind of like a nod to the past that we brought into a modern typeface, because it's really hard to make a typeface that can exist on all types of materials, branding, digital, physical space, and look like it's meant to be there.
Yeah, it's
That
crazy.
it doesn't look that it can like take on the aspects of whatever it's on and not be overpowering of the garment or the object, but still be powerful.
It should also kind of look like it's always been there.
Always been there, exactly.
And
Yeah.
that's it's really, really, really difficult. And also because people, it might sound mental, but I have an emotional attachment to typefaces. And I can get really upset about things. And I was involved with Calvin Klein. And in the changing of the typeface, which we did with Peter Saville. And it was really sort of like, and me and Peter Saville, God, I shouldn't be saying this, kind of didn't want to change it. We wanted to go back to the very original first one. It might seem like it was always that one, but it had changed a lot over the years, and I think Fabian Baron had done the sort of last iteration, and it was that kind of Futura light. But I also knew how attached people were to the Calvin Klein typeface, and we kind of went back to the original, and then it was changed, and then Raf was like, oh, and it capitalized. That one looks too disco. I was like, no, but it should be that one. And both me and Peter was like, no, it should be that. But it was a very disturbing exercise, and that and you realise that these things really matter, and people got really upset.
Because also it's like a choice that if you don't commit to and you change 2 years later, it shows like such, I don't know what the right word for it is, but like you're just not confident in your decision. And also just with the process of making things with the logo on it takes so much time. So you got to really make sure this is the thing forever.
You really do.
It's
But also
a really
there
big
was,
decision.
There was obviously the ALYX logo, which existed before, which just said ALYX.
which was but it was a great thing that we created. But I was doing it amongst like everything else, starting a business, designing the clothes. I never had the time to like zone in on this one aspect.
But it
of
kind
the
of laid down a
process.
bit of, as in it was a starting point for this, because we didn't
Yeah.
want to like completely change the look and feel,
Exactly.
but at the same time wanted to just make it feel a bit more elegant, a bit more contemporary, and they'll obviously acknowledge the name change.
Yeah.
It's
But you also
almost-
have these like beautiful numbers that surround a very simple word, right? So in the end, you don't need like particular distinctive expression within the letters, because those elements act as a kind of ornament for the word ALYX, which is important.
I think it's almost that thing when you practice, well, I did, used to practice my signature, and you just want your own signature, and it has to fit, and it really does. It stays with you for the rest of your life, and if you actually fuck it up, it's like, nah.
I never did that.
Yeah, I'm a
I
psychopath,
really messed up.
clearly.
Should have tried harder.
So it's like then what happens to this logo, right? Like one of the key things, and it's like such a pleasure to show you guys this folder, because this folder is like an abyss of tests for this label. Matt is like an amazing perfectionist when it comes to a lot of elements, but the label was a thing. The label had to be right, And so this is like what you're seeing here is all of the label test, but also like swing tags and so on. You're sort of seeing a little bit of the process of creation of that.
But each supplier, each material, each way of weaving a label or printing it, it comes out slightly different because you're taking this computer rendering and then you're applying it, and each supplier has a different hand. So, it was really interesting to see like what combination, which thing was going to have the most soul in it.
Yeah, you almost have to find the right machine. And there was this lovely like old loom process where you get the chasing threads, which was also like part of the evolution, not revolution idea, in that we almost repurposed and gave a healthy nudge to the existing label. The label itself, the final label, I mean, it's important to maybe describe a little bit. I mean, you have the like traditional label at the top, which is made on with the chasing threads. In a way, it's like the most proper way of making a label. You can make. There's a lot of companies out there now that will make you a kind of very clean, crisp logo thing, but honestly, there's very little soul left in it, and it's a kind of classic element. The label, anyone that. I mean, I don't know whether we're geeks or not. Hopefully everyone really enjoys this, but I know that I love looking at labels. When you get clothes, you're like, oh, nice label. It's like a thing. So you kind of had to be right, And then you have this element underneath, which is like the opposite. It's like very digital. It's very crisp, and it sort of captures the mechanical aspect of the language. So even in this one item, you get this like really lovely contrast.
Well, I was going to say we talk a lot about tension and balance. Balance is the answer to most things, and that contrast gives tension and balance to that.
And also about imbuing the clothes with a little bit of a message. So underneath the label, where it says ALYX, you actually have the collection code as well. So that's kind of hidden behind and above the Made in Italy part.
And then that label extends to other labels. This is a genius move. I mean, this is hands up, because this is Matt's move for sure. But the bottom label, maybe explain what that is, because it still amazes me.
You mean the actual construction of it? Yeah, it's monofilament, so it's like kind of like fishing line, and then we've, have the text woven through that. So it's basically like clear. But this visual label, for all of you that don't know, is the product that we make that's completely sustainable. So has, I guess nothing's completely sustainable, but uses recycled materials or upcycled materials or things like that. So. Yeah, when you see that label, that's what it is. But it came out beautifully, that one.
Yeah, it's really nice. And then there's the buttons. I mean, I think this is like just some of the buttons and trim elements. But the important thing to say here is that what like a lot of graphic designers are taught is you develop a logo, you develop a kind of corporate identity, you create a system, and then you let it happen, right? Everything is kind of the same. It's about this kind of seamless industrial action. And I think that something that's really important about this is that every single piece is designed differently to the other. It's not about like a cookie cutter method. And I think that's what's one of the most important points, in that it makes you aware of what each of these individual elements is. Each one of those is like a kind of character. And in a sense, it's a respect to those processes.
And then another thing we talk a lot about is like the ultimate dedication to an idea is the commitment to the unseen.
Yeah.
And all of this stuff is, stuff that nobody ever sees, never even notices a lot, but it really, I think, adds respect to each product, to each part of the process.
I think as well, it's extremely unusual to have the graphic designers working on buttons, to be working on the hardware in such a way so that you have this thread that goes through everything.
Yeah, a complete unity.
Yeah, you don't get that at many fashion houses at all. I mean, it's really unusual. It's like a kind of an OCD aspect, and I mean that in a good way. Well,
I think it's just the thing is that it's not us and Matt like separate. It's like this is like a synthesis, and also Lee Roach, who's like a key member of our kind of like the smaller team within the bigger team of this work. We just all were passionate about it, and we knew that each element had to be done right. I don't think we ever really considered it, because actually I don't think you can do this again, because it takes a long time. Like a really, really long time. Like each one of these elements is like multiple prototypes to get it right. So when we're in the studio and you get a little button in and you're like, it better be right this time, and you really got to like hold your breath, because if it's not, you got to wait a few weeks for a new one. And it's...
yeah. And if that few weeks misses a production, you miss 6 months.
Yeah. And then you upset the production team, and they'll become less keen on breaking rules when you want to break rules. So it's like a whole management process. You could say it's a kind of choreography exercise rather than a design exercise.
It's quite sort of, I mean, I was just talking about this, that there are certain things in menswear that don't kind of occur usually in women's wear, and there's a whole kind of mania in the sort of male psyche of shopping that is just not there in women's wear. So like the idea of scarcity, the secondary market, the idea of the drop, all of that sort of stuff, the way it's played out in menswear. In women's wear, it just doesn't happen. But also there is this insane attention to detail, the tradition of that in menswear. So it is like, oh, that button's like that. There's this many buttons here, there's this and this and this and this. But you've applied it to both sexes with ALYX. But I don't know whether it would really be there to that extent if you didn't have a menswear element to things. And if you weren't men. Because it's a bit sort of like, sometimes with women's wear, it's like, oh, let's just do a big hat and a cape.
That happens too, though, right? Like that's the beauty of like the tension again. I mean, the thing is as well is like the buckle is so key, and I think it's equally as amazing within the women's wear, but it's like what we did here, which felt like a really. I remember when we spoke about this actually. What we did is we removed the logo from the buckle, right? Like what ALYX used to have is the logo on it, and what we all realized talking about it was what we need to do is make the buckle a symbol in itself. And the question is, how do you do that? And what you do is you reduce all of the graphic components, the logo, the brand components, down to the level of the thing itself. So all of the typography here is not the logo, actually. It's System Helvetica, and it's cut and laser cut into the buckle in the same method as the other technical details. So in that sense, it creates a kind of democracy of content, and then you see the buckle as the expression.
It's almost like the medium is the message. It's the buckle becomes the logo. You don't have to have a logo splashed on everything.
Well, that was one of the things we were the most impressed with when Matt and Lee came to the studio to kind of present ALYX to us before we started working together. And Matt obviously had like a very, very good understanding of how you create strong visual identity, outside of the clothes. So the buckles, the buttons, which were kind of already in development, some of them. Were just such a strong part of what was going to become like a distinctive visual language.
And then it's like, what happens when you reduce the buckle down to that? It means that you can essentially start to work with other brands.
But this was one amazing choice, is that the scale of the logo stays the same size across all sizes of buckles too. That like unifies the language, and we've been actually playing with that a lot from a sustainability standpoint too, scale of things. But it allows freedom for other brands to interact with ALYX without it being overpowering of our brand or us of theirs, which I think is really powerful.
And this is the coolest one, right? I mean, for us anyway. I mean, to put that on the Air Force One is kind of awesome. But also, it's it works. I mean, if you had another logo there, it would be a real like cluster situation. And then there's other aspects of the hardware which remained unchanged. I think this is something that's really important about the evolution too. It wasn't when you have the opportunity to relook at the brand at large, you can say let's scrap this, scrap that, whatever. But actually, many aspects of the hardware remain intact and almost become part of the heritage of ALYX at this point. And then there's the typeface. So there's a custom typeface which acts. I mean, I don't know. In a way, you're not supposed to notice the typeface because the typeface is really, really neutral. It was redrawn from Lisong, which is the Latin characters in a Chinese system font.
So that has more glyphs than our language. So it gives us the opportunity to create new symbols with the extra glyphs.
Exactly. I mean, Lisong is like an all-round typeface, right? But it also has this like really beautiful kind of honesty. And so what we did, instead of just using Lisong itself, because honestly it's also really badly drawn, it doesn't really perform, is we simplified Lisong and straightened curves out. And to be honest, I feel bad going into like tremendous detail on this because it snaps into like a whole other lecture about typeface design that we work on a lot in the studio, but we can do it another time. But the important thing about this new typeface, which is called AFT, is there's multiple versions of it. So actually what you can do is start to have these very simplified family of fonts start to interact with one another, which is a really like kind of almost quiet revolution at the level of the identity. And like Matt was saying, that what we're doing, and it's an ongoing project, is we're building more and more glyphs as symbols within the typeface. So the typeface isn't really finished. It, in a sense, it's more of a tool and a kind of, in that sense, a kind of drawing tool that can kind of become anything it needs to be over time.
Yeah, so if you look at our products, like this one's sustainability, recycled, there's waterproof, non-woven, all these symbols are gonna, are used on our product. And if you look closely, we need to like show the diagram of like what each of these mean.
I think we spoke yesterday about making a kind of series of like graphic elements to celebrate them, because you need to see them at scale to kind of get it. Yeah,
there's like waterproof up there. Yeah.
But it's the way that seamlessness. I mean, this is like the again, you're not supposed to design this stuff, like supposed to. Like people don't, but we could, so we did. And it means that what you can do is have this kind of industrial level, which is like also super detailed. So this is like the care label that occurs in a lot of elements, garments. But it also means that when it comes to brand collaborations, like the MMW collection for Nike, you can like quietly sneak in with your kind of like, say, distinctive typeface, and the other brands don't mind, which is great.
So we went to an incredible amount of detail in terms of how do you explain collections. I think it's one of the things we notice with a lot of brands is that it's quite difficult to tell where a piece has come from. So as in what collection it came from. So it's a kind of an ambition of ours to create a kind of overview of all of the collaborations and all of the different seasons which were going to exist over the coming seasons.
And you can kind of see how that's applied to like various elements, including like sometimes at a display level on the season T-shirts. And this is getting really, really detailed, but we felt it was important to show like every aspect. But there's also a real consideration for how the industrial coding system works across like all elements within the brand, which means you can track every piece and every process.
Another big motivation of just doing all this too is we work at such a pace now that it has to be very collaborative with people all over the world. And how do you unify your branding when it shows up in every store space, within other companies, and creating these sets of I don't want to use the word rule, but basically this manifesto and branding guide, it allows for our brand to show up in the correct way in all the different places it needs to exist today, as as closely linked and strong as if we were able to just be there and do it ourselves. So having all these tools and rules allow it to exist in a good way in today's world.
And then it's like Matt was saying, like, how do you make this sustainable ultimately, not ecologically speaking, but also in terms of practice? And that is the user guide. But the user guide is, in the case of ALYX, isn't considered as something that no one will ever see, which is honestly like most user guides, but instead it becomes part of the language. So it'll be a critical part of the manifesto book and project. A little glimpse here. So moving into the absolute opposite, actually, like that was, that's like the mechanical, right, the hardware, and now moving into like the opposite, which is like the narrative section of the brand. So in this case, like ALYX curates cultural projects as an expression of the time, as an extension of its own ideas. In a sense, you could describe it as you have on one level a kind of factual layer, and that's kind of what we just went through. It's like literally is what it is. It's utilitarian, it's universal, it has authority, it's consistent. But on the other side, you have this kind of fiction, and this is where storytelling occurs, and that's where narrative elements, expressive elements, eclectic elements, much more experimentation, maybe on the level of like classic artistic experimentation occurs. And I think what we want to do here is just kind of give you guys a glimpse into like the key project that kind of is at this point is complete, which is Ex Nihilo. And Ex Nihilo, it's a name of the season that's currently live, but it's also it's an artwork, and it's unusual, I guess. I mean, this is something we've been really enjoying talking to Joanne about, because Joanne knows about fashion properly, knows about fashion, which we love. Because we're all thinking, has this ever happened before? Do people make artworks inside of fashion, or does fashion just like use art? Does it refer to art that already exists and put it on something? Art's relationship with fashion is kind of broad, but as far as we know, this is like, or at least we felt while making it, it was really important to make a unique artwork.
I do think both happens in fashion. I do think sometimes fashion uses art, and we'll do a straightforward presentation of it, but then there are other things where you go, okay, things that, but also that a lot of fashion designers will not claim to be artists. Something that Rei Kawakubo will do with Comme des Garçons actually might be kind of close to art. And she'd even sort of said, I'm not kind of doing clothes one season. But she still won't go that far. I think fashion is part of the arts. And often, I think the art world is really in love with the fashion world, is really sort of overwhelmed with the glamour of fashion. Because actually, a lot of people in the art world, they're a bit sort of geeky, and they kind of, being completely shallow, they can't even pick a pair of shoes to wear, really, and then they become our kind of arbiters of taste and culture. If you just actually look at how art people dress, you just go, shame on them. So it's sort of, but then you get somebody like Sterling Ruby entering the fashion world in a very genuine way, and what he did with Raf Simons when he did that collection, and that was a true collaboration. But what he's done himself is really incredible. And Sterling is the real deal. He is fantastic. And he's also been sewing since he was a kid. So, and there is this crossover between his art practice and what's going on with these fashion collections. It's not, he's not a dabbler. It's not a sort of like, he's not a dilettante. He's just kind of going, okay, I'm gonna try this. But he's also a huge artist. So but also fashion, you know, it can be these things. It can be what you say it is. It's, you know, but it's quite honest. And I think for me, the art world isn't always quite as honest as the fashion world. You know, it underplays the fact that there's so much money spent on something. There is like a kind of a money laundering operation, the art world. I mean, it is. And it's sort of like, because that decreases the value of the art if you actually suddenly say, well, actually, you know. But the way that you can use fashion, the way that you can say a lot about the world with fashion, and the way you can spread it to other people, and you can use it as a kind of in what would be like a kind of an idea of an addition or a multiple in the art world. You can kind of do that in fashion, and one of my friends who might be here, he does his line connected to his artwork. It's Blondie, and he does multiples and additions. That's what those things are. It's kind of merch. It's art merch. But you're doing something else, which is...
But I guess it's like the beauty is that we're all doing different stuff, and it's like there's a kind of fashion brings a certain kind of democracy to art, like which is what we all want, right? Like the art world makes art, the art that exists within that context, the only art. But actually, it's just like fine art or high art, right? Like low arts. I mean, a lot of that shit at this point is kind of low art also, you know? It's a big mixed hash of all sorts of things. And the fact is, art is part of human, you know, human life and culture. And of course, it has to exist within the space of fashion, because clothes don't exist in a vacuum. They have to exist alongside culture and the expression of culture. And I think that's the thing that we spoke a lot about, is like, what is ALYX's art, you know? Like, how does ALYX work with artists? And the truth is, like, honestly, in multiple ways. But there's this central project, which is, or there's this experimentation into a central project that's called Ex Nihilo, that is, essentially, it uses the space that would be dedicated to, you could say, a kind of campaign. In this case, what we did is we worked with Daniel Shea, who's an amazing photographer and artist. We all work closely in terms of the process. Just to imagine is like we're all sitting around, we're talking a lot, and we give Daniel a kind of conceptual framework, right? Which is, there's this sightseer, there's this character, and a statement, which is, to be a citizen of the world, you never feel like a tourist. It's like, who is this character that we're going to be looking at? I'm not going to go into detail on this, because honestly it's too detailed, but it's like, how do you brief an artwork, you know? Or how do you create the conceptual framework for an artwork? If you go back to the Sol LeWitt principle, like, the idea is the machine that makes the art, you know, you could say that the conceptual framework is the art, right? But there's also an artwork that occurs in reaction to that conceptual framework. So you start to get this quite interesting situation, which is really akin to ALYX, in that you get this kind of clash of all sorts of different types of art that are occurring within one space.
I think you also kind of, with fashion, you let it loose in the world and it becomes its own thing. I mean, I know that you'd said before as well, in the fashion industry, we're used to working with the idea of characters, that often a lot is based around character. Like, certain stylists will think in terms of a character to do certain things. At its kind of most base is like, the woman who personifies this brand is blah, 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 or the man who is this and is like James Bond. It's all a bit like that. But there are quite complex characters that come into fashion, and this sort of weird fantasy, fictitious world that you weren't used to working with. And we kind of go, oh yeah, you know, it's sort of like second nature in fashion. And with this was where the sort of fact and the fiction came into play, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, you have this. So just to explain, like maybe briefly, like we asked ourselves, like, who is this sightseer, and what are they seeing? So you write a kind of a character description of this person, and then what are they seeing? Well, what they're seeing are elements that are very connected to ALYX. You're seeing LA, you know, and the Bonaventure Hotel in LA, which is like a key location of Matt and Jen's past. You see the manufacturing of the clothing. You see the cities that are super common and common ground for ALYX in terms of inspiration, like Berlin, places in Italy, different places in Italy, like we said, like LA. I think New York occurs a couple of times, Milan. And you start to get this kind of character which starts to act as a kind of tool in a way to like look at the world of ALYX. But you don't need to know that, honestly. This is like behind the kind of structure of the concept.
Because actually the character, I mean, contrary to a lot of how characters appear in other fashion brands or in other stories, you never actually see the character in this book. The character is more of a vehicle to explore ideas about the world or about the city or about the 5 locations which are important to ALYX.
And there's that quote. But then you get this situation of like making of this artwork, and there's just a bit of a glimpse. But essentially what we did is we had this thousands and thousands of like images, like no exaggeration. And what we then worked on as specifically as a central piece of Ex Nihilo is a book project. That book project in a sense is the artwork. And there's a lot of aspects to it. There's photography, but there's also like a lot of work that happens directly to the plate. You can kind of see some of these tests here. What Ollie is doing there, actually, I think it's you, Ollie, is using a kind of acid to delete elements from the plate. So in a sense, what you do is like hack the industrial process, which again is like very, very has affinity with ALYX, you know. Then there's the book itself. And I've got a copy here. I think there's definitely a copy somewhere here. I think if anyone's interested, take a look because it's very rich and layered. What it is a kind of, you could say in terms of bookmaking, it's a kind of artist book. It's an object. It's a book object. It's almost a book object that you could say feels as though it's been discovered somehow. It doesn't feel like a book made by somebody else. It's almost like a book you've found somewhere. It's got these kind of sort of inky fingerprints throughout it, almost like someone's handled it. And then it comes with a series of posters which carry these statements from this sightseer, from this character. And those statements are really, really part of the inspiration for like that particular season. And then this is like a good indication of like the kind of final object. And there's a lot of elements too. I mean, this little object here with the codes below the images, it's almost like a signature of a catalog from the sightseer's work. So what a lot of these tools do are help you understand a certain kind of ambiguity and richness in the work. And in terms of what then happens, so you have the conceptual layer of like making of the artwork itself, but then you have the conceptual work, which is about how does this work enter the world and enter the space of ALYX. And that happens in multiple ways. So like one of the key ways it occurs and works into the world is as literally as an artwork, as an installation. This was in Tokyo during the Tokyo Art Book Fair. And it has in a sense a real autonomy from ALYX, but actually connects in other ways in a you could say in a kind of, how would you describe that connection?
Well, I mean, the book has 2 lives. It has one life independent, which is where it is an artwork to its full extent, and it has another where it becomes almost like a resource and an inspiration for the visual side of the collection. So it becomes, I mean, Matt can talk more about this, but the idea was to build an image library which could then be
used across lots of platforms. So prints for the collection, wheat paste campaign, advertising, the book was actually on the runway. Good timing. You're good. And
Yeah, that was a crazy moment, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have this book, and then you got this collection. It's like, how do we get the collection and the book to kind of have, or the artwork to have this kind of relationship? It's like, well, they could just walk with the book, and it was like, wow, you know.
Yeah. The showroom setup, it's involved. This is that idea of all output becomes input. So Daniel photographed at the factory that makes our buckles, and this is a factory worker that has kind of shreddings. Those are shreddings from the process of our buckles being made. And we collected those and casted them into a high heel. So the idea is like, that's a symbol of that nothing's wasted. Go ahead and talk about these invites, because they're pretty cool.
So you get this idea that almost like this project can start to influence anything necessary. So this is an invite for the ex nihilo season, and what you have is like the industrial layer, so the label itself, stapled to a contact strip, which is a photographic contact strip from the material of the sightseer, and then you have the foil stamp that was used within the book edition, and its foil residue, which is then part of the invite. So in that sense of like sustainability beyond ecology, like a kind of ecosystem, you could say, this is like a good example. But also the project then occurs inside of the showroom. So you have these huge like spatial projects where photography can start to exist, and the films also. And, you know, pointfully, it also ends up back into the collection. So in a sense, it becomes clothing itself.
Is that the woman who is the sightseer then? That
It
you've
is.
actually
No.
repurposed her as the sightseer.
It's the goat herder.
The goat
Yeah.
woman.
The Ibiza goat herder.
Yeah, I got married in Ibiza, and we were there shooting for the book, and we were driving past, and this woman was herding goats in a field, and Daniel just had me pull over the car and just like found a kind of connection with this woman, and she allowed him to photograph her while she was like tending to her goats. It was a pretty awesome moment, but the images turned out beautiful. She's like a local, you know, Ibizan woman, you know, Abisinco, that's been there for like, I don't know how many years.
And little does she know that she's part of an art project. I hope that she would
We
most certainly
didn't get
enjoy
her to
that.
sign the.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of that art into life thing, though, as well. I mean, I know that this project had a lot of these elements that were actually Matt's life, and the fact that, yes, he got married in Ibiza, and there are places that are significant for Matt and Jen, his wife, who also works on ALYX, and it's very sort of at the same time, it's a complete fantasy that the goat woman is the sightseer, but she is also real. And then when we met before to talk about this, then you have the intrusion of real life that happens with the collection itself and what's on Instagram and, you know, and all the rest of it. And it was Bella Hadid. Whereas for most people, she'd be the fantasy. She wasn't. That was real life. The goat woman was the fantasy. And it was sort of this, but that's what happens in fashion, especially now you're dealing with all these kind of multiple narratives at the same time, and how everything sits side by side. And it kind of does with ALYX. It's not a sort of stretch to have Bella Hadid and the Ibiza goat woman. It's just sort of like, that's kind of the label that it actually is. And, you know, there's a sincerity to both, really, you know.
And I think that's the thing with Ex Nihilos, it didn't have to, or doesn't have to feature the clothes themselves, because the clothes exist in multiple places within that communication sphere. The thing that's kind of cool also is that then it comes back down to this kind of another kind of clash, because there was also this moment, it's like, well, we don't have to put the clothes in it, but what if we do bring this art project to a campaign? And as a kind of final step, there's the kind of the campaign of Ex Nihilo, which is much more straight up. It's like what fashion does. It creates photographic campaigns to show the clothes in a kind of mood. But it was really satisfying to kind of, after, I think this is maybe 6 months after the art project kind of was finalized, to like then see how that kind of literally clashes with these kind of real characters and with the ALYX, the visual nature of ALYX, or ALYX clothes.
I think it's also interesting to say that whilst we were creating Ex Nihilo, it was always about creating a project which would have longevity. So it's not like a series of images which represents one season. Ex Nihilo actually has represented 3 seasons, but in different iterations or stages of the project, which again is this sense of evolution or revolution. Like a narrative can continue beyond like one collection of clothing.
And sustainability, that this project can feed so many aspects of a brand.
Exactly. And the reason why that's possible is because of a generosity in all respects to the collaborators and a sincerity to those who look after the collaborators. Because usually in commerce, you can't do this because the industry at large would just kind of prevent it through usage or through, essentially capitalism doesn't like it, But there's an incredible generosity. It's like, this is a real project. We're all excited about it. Like, how do we get it to last really long? And how do we get it to see it in multiple ways? That's really, really rare. So, like, moving into the kind of last section, this is the statement of ALYX approach is scaleless, performative, and procedural. It's present in everything it does. This is the moment where you could say the kind of factual and the fictional kind of come together on a kind of daily level. So you have the invitations, like this is the first season, and you have always this kind of set principle that you have a kind of piece of board. It acts as a kind of stage, let's say, and then something happens on that stage each season. So the first time it was this offcut of leather, and then this daisy, which was an influence to that particular collection. Then obviously the Ex Nihilo invitation, and then the current version, which is an artwork which was made and like key to that season. So you have this kind of, in a sense, design program that's really flexible and can allow multiple things to occur within it. But also it's really efficient, to work in this way. And one of the key projects of this sort of, let's say, this part of the project is preparation. So just to mention what preparation is. So preparation is this idea that like nothing is wasted, like in a sense, lots of stuff occurs during a season, like every season. And what we do is we work with Esther Thaker, who's a very talented young photographer. She comes to us with Paris, and for like 3 or 4 days, we shoot whatever's happening. We kind of talk about it as almost like a kind of generous lens, like anything is relevant. And I think in terms of like fashion's past, this is also relevant because we're all aware of like Jürgen's work with Helmut Lang and other really great examples of like backstage photography. But it was like, how does ALYX play into this conversation? And like, how does it make it extreme in a sense? So it wasn't just about like 3 or 4 backstage photographs. It was like, it's a whole book which is published each season. And the idea is that then becomes a kind of volume, and over time it acts as a record for what occurred. So it's in a sense it's very connected to this idea of the manifesto and how that functions.
And there's commitment to the idea and what this project is, to have something that can culminate in that. You know what I mean? At the very end. Same format, same idea, same photographer, for it to be one work.
It's a kind of dedication, right? And it's fun too. I mean, it's nice, It's like actually really nice to edit in that way and to work with Esther in that way. Like it's in terms of process, like for you guys, what happens is we get like thousands of pictures, and then we sit down and we crop the hell out of them. I mean, just to return to it for a minute, actually, because it's quite nice to see once you know how it's made. But you basically get this everything shot on film, which is important, Oh, sorry, technical here. Everything's shot on film, and everything comes in the studio, and then we. Sorry, just getting this presentation to work right. Everything's shot on film and everything's cropped in, so what you get is this crazy interest in like the detail of the film. So if you cropped into digital, as we all know, it would look like crap, you know. But because there's a grain, you really see like the beauty in every detail. So some of the images are actually like maybe this big, but we just look at a tiny, tiny piece of it. And then over the course of the book, you kind of get these really strange relationships between all kinds of stuff that's happening, which is really, really satisfying. Again, we've got a couple of copies here we can have a look afterwards. So other aspects that reoccur within ALYX, there's the shopping bag. So every season there would be a different material, and those materials you can sort of see the first two on the left. These are like just really, really cheap and really all for different occasions. It's all almost like building supply materials, right?
Yeah, so they're industrial materials which are actually used for, their original purpose is insulation material. So the kind of material which you used in building, which is not designed to be seen, but they have this amazing aesthetic quality.
And then on the right, you can see now it's part of the collection. So that's been like uprated to like a better material, and it now occurs as like a regular bag. There's all the kind of packaging elements. The top left, actually, these boxes are made in this like really, really cool old factory in South London, which these guys have been, I think it's like a few generations long, and they only make these kind of boxes. And most of the time, these boxes are used for like shipping whatever car parts or things that are nothing connected to luxury, but they're really beautiful. Like they're really beautiful, and you really feel the construction, the quality of them. And that material, what those boxes, the element on the left, the show notes, is just those boxes cut down. So all the offcuts and all the waste is then used for the show notes. The business card. This is something that makes Matt happy because he loves the business card. It's got this like crazy little gum strip on the back, and you rip it off and you get this really beautiful little kind of piece of gum that sits along the top. So in a sense, like every card becomes unique. You should move on because your phone number's on that one.
Yeah, that's. I was just thinking that.
I was just thinking that too. Whoops. Okay. It's not really his phone number. It's a trick one. It's a fake phone number. Don't call it ever. Then there's the buckle box. So here it's the manifesto photography on the front of the box, and then it's exactly the same scale as the buckle in the box, and it's all water cut foam inside, and engineered in a very satisfying way. Then there's the website. The website was like the most smooth project. We were talking about this yesterday. Like websites can be a real bitch for like everyone, Like they're really difficult. Like anyone that's ever worked on a website here would know that. But somehow this was a really efficient process. It's super functional. Does what it needs to do. It's not conceptual at all, actually, which is quite satisfying.
Doesn't overpower the product.
Exactly. It just works. It's a tool. Then there's space. So space is it's kind of crazy. It's a crazy project. It's been great. We've been 3 seasons now of spatial projects. In a sense, it's the same idea as the invite. You take a surface, almost like a stage, and then you interact with objects on top. The idea of the showroom was to make sure that it was considered not trying to design it perfectly to start, but a series of prototypes. So there's 3 spatial prototypes.
I think there was an acknowledgement at the beginning of the process that we didn't want to rush to create any final decision immediately. So it was something which we planned in to be developed over 3 seasons. So you take a concept, and then every season you develop it based on the requirements or the, what didn't work well, or it's a consistent process of improving.
This has now been kind of extended, but there's a series of archetypal elements which then get reconfigured on this kind of almost stage element. And everything is using fairly off-the-shelf materials. I mean, it's really, really inexpensive, actually, like compared to what you can do, you know? It's not that inexpensive, actually. It's like, but it's, you know, people do go crazy with their showrooms and shows. There was a really interesting stage at the beginning, and it still occurs, actually, this kind of material investigation. So, like, what happens when you take, like, off-the-shelf plaster and start to texturize it? Or what happens when you find like specific installation materials that you never see? They're just like living walls and covered by plaster, but what's the beauty in those materials? And then just to give you guys a little sense of what those spaces ended up being. So in the first instance, you've got this kind of classical space in Paris, wooden floors, like, you know, in a way like an environment which isn't very ALYX, you would say, but like, put those elements in, there was like a really lovely tension. The next season was like that crazy industrial space, which was just like a gift. And then you start to see this kind of evolution into something more and more complex. And you can see that the buckle kind of holds materials together, so different felts and insulation materials. So the important thing is, if you're going to make a sustainable showroom, you need to be able to pack it down and store it. It's like really important consideration. So everything here is very easy to compile, very easy to build. Our collaborators, Hesselbrand, worked with us on this, who are architects. Their concern is more spatial, but it was really fun to work with them also in a sense to art direct like specific materiality and specific connections of materials. And that's everything, actually. That's pretty exhausting.
That was cool.
Yeah.
I'll do that. Yeah. It's cool to show you guys that, because that's something we normally never show to the world. That's all like internal work that you kind of fast forwarded through 3 years of projects in this hour, which is really cool to be able to do. So that's some cheat codes, as we were talking about.
Sure. Should we open up for Q&A?
Let's go. Yeah.
Any questions?
Just a question for everyone. What kind of informs the imagery used on like different garments or like just general collateral that has to do with the brand? Like, how do you tie in your philosophy with like different imagery, and is it like important for the viewer to understand what the subject matter is?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. Sometimes it's really literal. Other times it doesn't make sense. I don't know. I think a good idea has to be able to be, I don't know, like be understood, whether you don't know like where it necessarily comes from so deeply at the beginning. It has to still like look good, you know. And then if you decide to go deeper and understand like the depth of the image or project, that can be like additional information that can make you like it. But it's hard to say. A lot of it's just a feeling, you know.
Yeah, we allow that to happen, right? Like some things are just like you said. It's this dichotomy. It's like both functional and like clear and understandable, almost ridiculously so. Like in the case of the buckle box, the belt box, you don't stick some emotive imagery on there, like something that the buckle makes you feel. It's just the buckle, right? But on the other hand, there's like ex nihilo, which is totally ambiguous. You know, like what is this stuff we're looking at? You know, in the end, you know, I guess. In fact, I'm super interested. Like, what does everyone think when they see this? Because we're super close to it. You know.
Yeah. For us, I would imagine that maybe many of you wouldn't think that much effort goes into little tiny things like that. You know, that we spend months and years on like that small of a thing, but that's kind of what it takes to do something that's really, you know, well done. What do you
Hi.
guys think?
Thanks for coming out and doing this. This is kind of a question about semiotics and interpretation, like kind of building on the last question, but I understand you guys have been explaining that brand identity is kind of this like mini universe that you design that people can interface with as they see like imagery from different facets. So how do you go about like communicating like that full kind of manifesto to people that, for example, are seeing like an ALYX graphic tee for the first time? And if you're like a new brand, how do you go about designing in a manner that you can like educate people about different elements of the identity and sort of like trying to embed all of that into one garment. Like there's people that will desire like ALYX and don't understand the whole brand manifesto or like the manufacturing processes. So what do you think is like the main element of the product that's drawing people's attention and making them like want to have it?
Yeah, that's really, really hard to say. It's different for everybody. But I think, you know, it's hard to have all that go into like each product. It's more about the overarching concept of the brand and its lifespan. And a lot of times that can only be really realized when you look back after time. No? What else would you add to that?
It was a really long question. I can't even. I really liked hearing the question, but it's tricky. It's all tricky.
I
It's
think
hard
there's
to
so
explain.
there's so many channels, right? There's so many opportunities for ALYX to communicate what it does. It's definitely not within each garment.
Yeah.
But if you look at, I don't know, things that ALYX produce over a period of like 2 or 3 or 4, 10 years, the manifesto will become clearer. Also, this the dedication to release it as a published book, so that audiences can buy it and actually invest a little bit more time into understanding it.
Yeah, I would also say like ours, there is like a lot of complexities in a lot of the stuff that we're doing, but if I was a brand starting out and I was somebody that was just beginning one, I would make the message very clear and simple, especially if you didn't have the opportunity to make as many types of products as we do. I'd kind of like zone in and create a boundary to a small framework to work within that was really clear. 'Cause I think
that for sure.
Clarity is the strongest thing, and people can't retain that much information. That's why also we don't talk about a lot of this stuff, because people can't retain it all at once. You can't, like, even the buyers that buy our collection, they're just going in there, they're like, I like this, I don't like this, they don't.
I do think that's the great thing about fashion, though, that you are allowed to just like something and just feel it in that very instinctive way. And if you want to know more, you go deeper and you find out more, and it exists. But I think sometimes that instinctive pull towards something is actually because there is something deeper there, and you don't quite understand at first, and you go, why has this got some sort of weird fascination and attraction for me? And then you go, oh, I get this now. But first and foremost, and I think you should just like it, and you don't necessarily have to know everything. You can just go, I just like that. But the embedded meaning and the effort, I think that often you can feel the effort. You can feel the amount of time and the amount of thought that goes into something without even knowing necessarily that it's there. It just has a certain quality to it. It has emotion poured into it, and then you feel some sort of emotion.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kito. Thanks for your time here today. It's been really amazing. It's been epic. I had a quick question about your collaboration in film, ALYX in the cinematic universe, and I watched 2049, and I didn't realize that you guys were kind of a part of that, and I just wanted to hear your take on that.
Sorry, what's 2049 again?
Oh, Blade Runner, the set for Blade Runner. There was.
Trying to think. I think one of the stylists used our shoes in one of the looks or something like that.
How does that process go? Were you aware of that, or was
No, I wasn't aware of it. I knew that the stylist had like pulled some of the shoes, but I didn't
it was just one of those
notice
things
that.
I noticed, and I was like, wait, is this like a purposeful thing that like
Yeah.
only a few people, like a niche amount of people will get, or?
No. It was just something that the stylist decided fit the character really well.
Okay.
I forgot about that. That was really cool when that happened. It was like a really cool surprise. Yeah. See, so many things that are sick.
Joanne, you mentioned that the buckle has become the logo, and I know working with a lot of clients, in my field when I'm working with younger designers and younger brands. My biggest advice to them is that at the end of the day, your end goal should be that your silhouette is your logo. So my question is for all of you, how long did you wait or should you wait to trust in your customer to still support a heavier push or emphasis on the silhouette rather than a heavier branded product?
Yeah, that's like such a great question. I mean, we did the buckle for about a year and a half, 2 years before it even started selling because it's expensive. It's not made with a fashion supplier. I don't know. The first ones don't even fit through your belt loop. You have to like kind of like wear larger belt loop pants or figure out a way. Anyways, it was just something I believed in. It had a feeling. It came from a place of emotion and something that meant something to me. So we stuck with it. And I think, there's that commitment to an idea that allows others to believe in it. So if you find a silhouette that you believe in or a material, whatever, something that you feel is like as part of your brand identity outside of something that's graphic based, I think that commitment to it over time allows others to believe in it. And if you think about like Wu-Tang, ASAP, you have a group of guys all moving in the same lane, there's like belief. Or like Tom Brown, everybody dresses in Tom Brown. Everybody, like Rick, everybody dresses in Rick. That little like crew of people that all look the same allows like a family that others want to believe in and be a part of, even if it's extreme. You know what I mean? So I think it's just like the commitment to it.
But I think as well, you've kind of moved beyond just the buckle as well, and that there is a silhouette to ALYX, and that there is this kind of. But did you find that it was almost you were feeling your way towards the silhouette?
Yeah.
That it wasn't there at first. The buckle was there, but not necessarily the structure of a jacket.
Yeah, I mean, it just takes time, to find. There's so many like aspects of that. You know what I mean? Because things look different on different models. Sometimes we're prototyping with factories at the beginning, not having like space to change things if depending. So there's like a lot of elements that kind of go into finding the silhouette and whether or not you can even always execute the one that you want to be. Because a lot of times you'll have a sample, you'll want it to like look a certain way, and then you need to cast a model to fit it right so that it's going to look right on the runway or in the image. That's sometimes hard to find somebody that's you can't always just like make another jacket at the right scale that you want. Sometimes it's easier to find a person that's going to look the right way in the garment. So yeah, it's kind of complex thing, but yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
Hi, my name is Anisha, and I just wanted to piggyback off of a question that was asked earlier about collaboration. I wanted to know, how do you determine what brands you want to work with in a collaboration and what kind of requirements they have to have, and then how do you go and approach them and kind of get that relationship going?
Yeah, so at the beginning especially, we were really limited to what kind of factories we could work with, what kind of products we could produce. So a first check on the box was like, can this person do something better than we can? Are they more proficient in a certain material or type of product? And if they are, let's do something with them. Also, if they have alternate platforms of communication that we would normally not have access to, do they collaborate in a different sphere than we would normally? So a lot of that stuff, a lot of the collaborators were kind of chosen because of that, or they chose us because they thought we could bring something to maybe a heritage product that they do, like Macintosh, which if you guys don't know is like a 100-year-old raincoat company from Scotland, and it's completely handmade in a really unique process where people actually build these jackets by hand, start to finish. So yeah, that's kind of like the main main thing, can they do something that we can't? But as far as like courting collaborators, honestly, I can't think of one clothing collaborator that I like actively like reached out to. They were all kind of naturally through meeting people, them coming to the showroom, or me working with them in the past in some capacity. I never like really hard pitched somebody. I can't think of a time that I did that. I have done that with suppliers where I'm like, this supplier makes something that I really want to make. I go there and drive to the factory, show them the project, convince them, get them to believe in the idea. That I definitely have done, but not with like a collaboration that you guys have seen like for sale.
Hi, my name's Gerardo, and I actually had a question you mentioned something about how this is a lot of information you don't share with the rest of the world, and I actually am a buyer for retail, and we carry your collection at my store, and I'm kind of curious as to why you wouldn't share this or make this more available to people, because I feel like now knowing as much as I know and seeing how much you really invest into the image of the brand and what the brand represents, it almost makes me more passionate to carry your collection.
Thank you.
Therefore pushing your collection more towards the client and educating the people to understand what you guys invest in, because a lot of the time we do carry brands that it's just for money, it's just to turn a profit. But when I see brands like this and the store that I work for, we find more passion in what you guys are doing now.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons we're doing this right now. There's a live stream happening. I don't know how many thousands of people are watching it. This is going to get documented and put up on our Instagram.
And the manifesto book.
Yeah, the manifesto book. It's hard to do, like, find the right avenues and outlets for this type of stuff, and also have the time to do it properly. So we do it in small segments. Like you'll see in our Instagram posts, there'll be like descriptive elements about projects. But Instagram's a new thing. I don't know how much people are receiving that information through that channel. It's something that we definitely want to do as much of. But I think all of you paid to be here. You made an effort to come here, to invest your time and your money, so you're all receptive to this information. Sometimes when you're just kind of throwing stuff out there, there's not a promise of listening on the other side. I think it's important, for this kind of stuff to stick, is that, us being generous with the information, we're also speaking it on open ears. Because it has value. And so I hope over time more people will discover this in really authentic ways, because then I think it can really resonate.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
My name's Desier. I'm a designer. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, but my main focus is like goldsmithing. I work in fine jewelry. And I also do fashion as well. And I've been doing it for over 11 years and kind of like beating myself over the head trying to make sure typography and all that other stuff is right, because like when you work in fine jewelry, you start to notice things that like other people wouldn't notice, and it like drives me crazy. And I was wondering, like, once you feel like, okay, I have this right, my silhouette's right, did you feel like I have to leave Chicago to like get more love or get the brand more out there? Because I kind of feel like when I'm in Toronto, I stretch myself out to where people know what I do, but I feel kind of like stuck in a way. But I feel like other people outside of Toronto might know about me. But did you feel like, oh, I have to get out of Chicago to get...
Yeah.
Yeah?
It's really interesting. Like I'm completely unaware of my relationship with the rest of the world. I have no clue how big this brand is or how many people are aware of it. I mean, people show up today, but like I think even before with the work, I was just concentrated on making work and producing output. I moved to New York City because that was a place in America that you could do fashion and high fashion, and there was a community that I met and that really inspired me when I was living there. And then through the other opportunities that came, I got to travel the world and and meet more people. So, you know, my only suggestion would just be like, if you know, keep making good work, people will notice it, and put yourself out there and start to build bridges with other creative communities around the world. And now it's so much easier with the internet. When I first started working, you know, it wasn't as freely communicative as it is now. I would really have to travel, go out to like a nightclub, go to a gallery show, sneak into a fashion show to feel some kind of energy from a creative community. But now you can really live anywhere and get like at least some dialogue with it, which is really beautiful. So no one has an excuse anymore not to feel like a part of it, because it's there for everybody.
I do think though it's very difficult to commit to fashion in a certain way without being in one of the major fashion centres, and you don't meet, you know, like say if I didn't spend the time that I have done in London, you know, a lot of the big fashion schools are there, and you just end up meeting people, and you all kind of congregate in these sort of cities. And I know myself when I've gone, oh God, I just want to live somewhere else, and I can't. I have to live somewhere where I have access to Paris, I have access to London, or then I have to be sort of near New York or Milan. And it's really sort of, you think, well, I can do this, I can do that. You can to a certain extent, but you won't ever get that kind. And also, it's all the other sort of mechanisms that you deal with, like simple things, like PRs.
So, like more or less, like if I'm not within one of the meccas, then I can't. There's no way to create a mecca in Toronto type vibe. You know what I mean?
It just depends what we're talking about here. She's talking about making clothing, the fashion industry,
Well,
with fine jewelry.
on
Then
fashion products. So
yeah.
it could be jewelry, it could be clothing, anything. Even music, I feel like is fashion in a way, but I just feel like there should be.
It's easier with music. You can be
But
outside of these
I also
places.
think it's an international thing at this point. I mean, we've seen a change, right? Like people of our age, we've kind of got this like nice first time we can actually reflect and say things have changed. Like you can see it. It's global, man. It's like a global time. So you can work with someone in London. You could work with like someone on music in like, you know, wherever, Lagos, and then someone on like your photography that lives in like wherever, you know, and like you suddenly tapping into all these different communities. Like everything we've done with ALYX is totally international. Like the community, if you write down the community that's part of this project, you know, of ALYX, it's like everywhere.
But I'd
It's
still say
it's beyond all city. It's like.
But you can
you know.
do that, but there's also points where you have to go to one of the big fashion
Yeah,
cities.
you have to pop in for sure.
You have to
but,
sort of like go,
Yeah.
you know, because I've worked with a lot of people who are based in Belgium, but they go to Paris to show. They go and you know, they made Antwerp into a fashion city, but you can't do all your shows there. It's like there has to be this kind of point of arrival somewhere. And there is this really, you can't believe, like when I live outside of London a lot of the time, and when I go, can you just send that to me in the post? They're like, well, can't I just bike it to you? I'm like, no, it's too far. And people freak out. And you're like, what's the matter? Just send it overnight. And it's really weird. It's when you have to sort of kind of, but why can't I do that? Why aren't you just around the corner? There's a necessity to create a link to certain places and to find. I still think that in real life there is a degree of conservatism. If you just went off and lived in Peru and never went to Paris or New York, or you're going to be in trouble.
That's what I'm thinking. Like I'll be lost, right?
Yeah.
And you see that same feeling you're saying. When I'm in Toronto, I'll make samples all the time, and I know where to go to make all my stuff, to get my gold, to get something embroidered, whatever it might be, right? If I go to London now, I'm sure there's those places, but I'm like lost now in a whole new place, right?
Yeah, I mean, but you have to sort of acclimatise to those places as well. And places become kind of fashion centres. Things change, like Milan. It's because it's connected to manufacturing. It used to be Rome, but everybody's forgotten that. But actually, all the factories are outside there and are kind of near Florence as well. And that's why Florence has that sort of element too. But the reality of it is, it's different in music. I mean, I grew up in Manchester, and you know, Manchester kind of made its own sort of thing. You don't have to be in one of the big capital cities, but there is still a traditional element in fashion.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
So I think this is the last panel of today. I know we have 2 more workshops after this. In the Sugar Hall A, we're doing the OKRM workshop, and at 6:30, I believe, what time is it now? Yeah, 6:30, we're doing the Vibram workshop in the textile studio. So we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Again, thank you for coming out, spending the day with us. Sorry about the delay, and yeah, we'll continue growing family tomorrow, so thank you.